Many, many years ago, today's guest, Roger Christensen, got the opportunity to do set decoration for a little known sci fi movie that was to be released. Little did anyone know that that little sci fi movie was going to change the direction of sci fi forever. Join me in 5 minutes to see what that is. Now, today's guest, Roger Christensen. Okay. Today's guest, Roger Christensen, got the opportunity to do set decoration for a little known sci fi film that was being made. Little did he know that that sci fi film would change the course of history for all sci fi movies after it. Join me in 5 minutes for details. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good morning, everybody. My hat's even on crooked. How's everybody doing this morning? I know it's mid-afternoon for some people. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Waiting for Roger to come into the chat room. Let me get my little buttons pushed here. There we go. Anyway, I am the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state. And that means that we can get to you if no matter where you're at in the state of California, we can get to your place, And one thing about our team that is unlike other teams is that when we go in to do investigation, we don't just look for paranormal stuff. We are looking for logical stuff. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at electrical wiring and things like that in your house, and just to make sure that there's nothing else going on. Plus medical, things like that. So we're very thorough with what we do. So if you feel you have a paranormal need, then contact me, and that would be through CaliforniaHaunts.org, CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com, Facebook. You can find California Haunts on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook, and yeah, you can do that. I see Roger's in the green room. Give him a quick wave. Let him know. You can probably hear me. Today's show. Boy, I'm excited about. I say tonight because I'm used to being on at night. I'm so excited about this, and I'm gonna admit something to everybody, and I'll probably get yelled at by the Star Wars folks. In that, I was not a Star Wars fan when Star Wars first came out. I was not a Star Wars. I'm a Trekkie. Okay, I'm a Trekker. And so I was probably around 20-something years old when Star Wars came out, maybe younger. I don't quite remember. But I remember that I can honestly say I thought it was all silly. I really did. And what got me into it, and this is funny, the last probably 10 years, because my friend would buy me Star Wars Legos. And that's how I got into it. I had the first Lego was the big AT-AT. I think it's a big AT-AT. I call them Imperial Walkers. And that was the one with the batteries in it, so it would walk. It was a real big one. That's what got me into it. Then I got the Death Star, and then it went from there. And then I became a Star Wars nerd. So actually, I'm a Trekkie and a Star Wars nerd. All right. The other thing too that got me into this, and I don't talk about this very often. When I was younger, a friend of mine lived in Hollywood, and she met a gentleman who worked for Rick Baker. And this gentleman, Rob Bottin, had worked on the first Star Wars film. He had done the makeup effects and creature effects for along with Rick Baker for the cantina scene. And it was cool because I got to take a tour of his studio, because at that time he was working on different, because that's when the slash and gash was really popular. So he was doing a lot of slash and gash stuff. He worked on the first Halloween as well. And I remember his studio was in Pasadena, and he took me over there, and I got to see all this really cool stuff that I've seen in some movies, because he had all these creatures and all this. So it was really cool, And so, like I said, I wasn't a big Star Wars fan back then, but I was really impressed by the makeup effects. That's what got me into going to college to study makeup and makeup effects, and that led to me building sets. So I was building sets, and I did some shows and whatnot, and it was kind of cool, but I learned to build sets, practical sets, the other kind of sets. I always laugh because I still have my stagecraft book here in my family because I live alone, and my brother-in-law is a contractor, and he's forever laughing at me because I will fix things. I will fix things the movie way. I will fix things the way one does for a play. But I can fix things. If my door jambs fall off, I'm there. If I need French doors, I'm there. If I need to stucco a wall, I'm there. I know how to do it. Except I do it for stage. I do it for stage and film. And the only difference is that instead of using light wood for stuff like you do on a set, I'm using real good wood to fix stuff. But I mean, other than that, I'm there. So I'm excited to have this gentleman on. I really am, to talk Star Wars, to talk about the sets with him, because it's no, it's no small undertaking. And I'm also a person, and he's a set decorator, and I have props in this house. My Halloweens are just fabulous. So are my Christmases. I have props all over my house, all over my backyard. I have sheds full. And I remember one time we had some people working on our bathroom, and our plumbing, of course, runs along the ceiling. And back then, I used to store bodies in my attic. And I only have I don't have a big attic. I have a crawl space up there. And I used to store bodies up there. And this poor guy, there was a leak somewhere. This poor guy had to go up into the attic. And I was at work, and I forgot to tell my mother to tell him about the bodies. And the poor guy, my mother says he came down, he was screaming. Okay, because I mean, these things, when I get done with them, they look real. Okay, so there were body parts up in my attic, and this guy was just freaked. Here he's up there with a little pen light looking around up there, and boom, that's what he runs into. So I mean, yeah, I've been into the movie stuff for a long time, and so when you talk about set decoration and props, I can create just about anything from what I have. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to bring my guest on, and he has an interesting story to tell, and I'm going to let him tell you his story. And then we're going to talk to him about how he was able to do this and how creative you can get. Because, I mean, when you're working with studios and stuff, there's big prop departments. I always loved it. Go to Universal Studios, and what do? They drive you through the prop department, and it's mind-boggling when you see the props that you can use for set decoration and stuff that you have. But sometimes, as in the case of something like Star Wars, their sets just, the stuff they have for set decoration just isn't enough. So you have to get really creative, and this is what this gentleman does. So I'm going to bring him on. All right. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Nice to meet you.
Now that I'm long-winded, are you awake now?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening. I like the body story.
That poor guy. My mother says he screamed.
I bet. Yeah.
So tell me about you. You have a fascinating background.
Well, I came into the film industry trying to get a job. I didn't know anyone. It was just I by chance saw the first James Bond movie being shot. I was putting up marquees as a student trying to earn money. And we saw a prison camp in the forest, and I went to see what it was, and they said, "Oh no, it's a film set." And I said, "But this is really real." And they said, "It's so real. We have a homeless man come by every day and feed us." So I said, "Well, what is this for?" I knew nothing about films. I was a kid from Reading in England and had no comprehension the movies were even made. And I got under the fence, and it was Pinewood Studios, and I saw the doors were open and they were shooting a James Bond scene, one of the first ones, and it was like Holy Grail struck me. And then I was in the prop room, and there were gold bars, and I was going, "Oh, but look, these are just plaster. This is all pretend. I got to do this." So it took me 2 years of architecture school, and nobody would respond to me. One producer kindly wrote back out of all my letters and said, "Look, you're in art school. Why didn't you try to go in the art department? It'd be easier." And I managed to get an interview somehow. And the film, when I saw the film that really, really did it for me, it was Dr. Zhivago. We went as art students to London and watched it in the Odeon Leicester Square on the huge screen. And I literally had a bout of body experience with the music and everything. It had happened to me in childhood. And there I was. And I said, "This is destiny." My first interview was with the designer who did the Ice Palace for Dr. Zhivago. So here, destiny's kind of joining the dots for my journey. And Charlie looked at all my work and he said, "Listen, I can't take you on. We're just finishing the TV series, but I will be doing another one and I'll take you on. But I've made an appointment for you. Drive to Shepperton tomorrow." And I had a moped. That's the only transport I could afford. I drove all the way to Shepperton Studios with my folder and met John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago. And he looked at my work and he said, I'll take you on if you'll make the tea for the art department. And I said, whatever you want, I don't care. I'll do anything. So I got this job. It was about £10 a week. And but John was one of the most wonderful mentors I think I've ever had. He looked after me. He opened my folder of work, architecture and art, and he closed it up and he said, here's the story of the film industry. You're in the desert. You've got a bottle of green ink in your pocket. In comes a cloud of dust. There comes the director, the producer. Wow, this is great. Location's perfect. Can you have the aeroplane you're standing next to red by tomorrow morning? And you do it, or you talk your way out of it on the spot with an alternative. That's the film industry, and that's guided me through my entire career. And, you know, I worked my way up until we were working in, John Barry was a designer. They were on a huge movie called Lucky Lady, starring Liza Minnelli and Burt Reynolds and Gene Hackman, and it had got completely out of control. There were 50 boats fighting. It was rum running in the 20s. They needed extra help. There were only 3 of them in the art department. I went out and was dressing sets. So this film was written by Gloria and Willard Huyck. They wrote American Graffiti for George, and they did some of the dialogue for Star Wars for him. They told George when Fox, you know, all the studios turned Star Wars down, I think it's common knowledge, except for Alan Ladd Jr., and went against his board and said, no, I believe in this kid, we should do it. They then said, well, this film's going to make $12 million. So, and that was science fiction at the time. There was no box office. No one wanted to see science fiction in cinema. They said, we'll give you a third. If you can make your movie for $4 million, we'll give you the money. And so in England, we were half the price exactly of America, and the budget was reckoned to be $8 million. There were no studios free in Hollywood. The studios in Britain were mostly empty. It was a time, you know, when nothing was happening. So George flew down, met John Barry and myself. I was dressing a salt factory. He picked up a shovel. This is George, typical, and shoveled salt with me while we talked. And he said, you know, I'm trying to do a spaghetti Western in space. And I said, well, that's music to my ears, because I don't relate to any science fiction film that's been made so far. They're all fake and unreal, and the sets are some weird futuristic design. I think it should be like an old car in a garage that's dripping oil and repaired by the owner. Little did I know at the time, I was describing exactly the Millennium Falcon that he'd written. And John was the first person hired on Star Wars, and I was the third. And then Fox would not commit to greenlight it. So George, with money he was owed, we hired a little tiny studio in London. There was just John Barry, myself, and Les Dilley, and Robert Watts, the controller, and George and Gary. And we were in this tiny little studio with no money. They had no money to give us. And John Barry, who was the second most genius designer and human being I've ever worked with, and George owes a lot to John on how this film got made. He said, you know, R2-D2, we'd worked out from Ralph McQuarrie's paintings of C-3PO and R2-D2, was 4 foot high. There was no CGI. This doesn't exist. This came in way later. Radio control was really primitive at that time. You couldn't rely on it, and we were going to be way in the desert in sand dunes. He said, you better build one out of wood and see if we can make it work, because if we don't have R2-D2, George doesn't have a movie. C-3PO was based on Metropolis, on Maria in Metropolis, made in 1927. We knew we could make that better. This was, 40 years later. But I hired a prop maker and set designer, kind of man who did everything, Bill Harmon, who did all the Monty Python films, you know, and they really had no money. I mean, they couldn't even afford horses. They had coconut shells banging together. So Bill made us a wooden R2-D2. He couldn't make the top. couldn't make the round one. He told me to go and find something. I went to a scrapyard and found a lamp top from an old light that had been discarded and thrown in the trash heap, and that fitted. And I got some air nozzles from an old facility. I bought a few bits of junk to stick in to make it look a little bit better. He's got arms on the front, little ones that move like that. Bill said, I can't do that. They gave me a piece of wood and a penknife, and I went and carved those at home at night. And we built it round Kenny Baker, who was 3'8" and strong enough, we knew, to work it. And he was a comedian, so he had a sense of humor. And we got it eventually to walk 3 paces. And that was probably the most auspicious moment on Star Wars. He couldn't do it, by the way. With the junk I bought, I found an old fighter pilot's harness, and I thought, oh, that might be useful. Bought it. This was like 5 shillings or something. And we'd nailed Kenny's boots inside the wooden mock-up, and he couldn't move it. We stapled this harness inside so Bill could put R2-D2's body like a rucksack and hold the weight. And that's when he did 3 steps and fell over. We were watched by George and Gary, and it was like the relief was immense because we knew, okay, this can work. That's how it started, and that's how it began, and that's how it was all the way through, really. I couldn't, I didn't know if I was on the right track of what I was doing. George was a student like we were. We were all so young.
Right.
So I decided my biggest kind of thing that I didn't like about sci-fi movies was the weapons. They would just beep and they would not do, and they looked light and they were plasticky. So I had this idea, if I used real weapons and adapted them, I could afford it because I had so little money in my budget to do all the weapons. So I knew the owner of the one weapons facility in London. They hired, you could supply guns for the entire World War II sequences, everything. They had a huge supply. I found a gun that I loved and I thought was a sci-fi gun anyway, which was the Sterling submachine gun. And I got some T-strips, stuck it round with super glue, found this old gun sight and stuck it on the top. And I thought, you know what, this looks quite interesting. And it's just adapted enough to give it a look, but it could fire. You could fire single shots and get a little flame out the end and smoke. And then, based on George's kind of description of Han Solo as a Western cowboy, gunslinger, I found this German Mauser with a wooden stock, which I love the design of. And I did the same to that. I stuck on a rangefinder on the top, a few bits on it. I found a thing on the end that went on a different machine gun that hid the flash, so they wouldn't get spotted in the war, which is World War II. Added that on and called George over. And I told John, you better come, because if I'm on the wrong track here, I'm just going to get fired and removed. And George loved them. They could fire, they could hold, they were weighty, everything. And that set, again, the precedent for the entire movie for me with George. He entrusted me from then on. I built everything on Star Wars. He never refused anything. Everything I gave him, he accepted and went on to the film. And he stayed with me and got super glue on his fingers because we made Princess Leia's gun in the facility as a third gun, and we stuck all that together. That's the opening beginning of what I did and how this happened. And I think, honestly, from a young age, I always thought outside the box. I never thought conventionally. When I got to work on Oliver with John Box, the first film, making tea, I was in come from art school. I had hair down my shoulders, Cuban boots, jeans. I was in cinemas every weekend watching Kurosawa and Fellini and Pasolini and Truffaut. I was in a room full of ties and suits and short hair being told off, get your hair cut. This is a job. You can't, forget all those arty films. Get on the drawing board, get and knuckle down and be conventional. And I thought, you know what, I'm not having any of that. And John Box supported me all the way through because he knew that I could draw and I could do things. So that's a kind of potted history of what I'm doing.
Well, I watched I've been watching the TV series on Disney Plus about
Yes.
about ILM,
Yes.
and it's interesting because all you guys were young,
Yes.
and because I think that's what you needed though, because this was so cutting edge, and you guys wanted, like you say, sci-fi was so plastic looking,
Yes.
and then this is it takes young minds to create this stuff, to do that cutting edge stuff. And like you talk about, how you guys were doing it, it's with I'm going to say paper clips and glue. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what you guys did, and I just find it so amazing that you came up with the stuff you did.
Well, in the documentary, I've just finished The Galaxy Built on Hope. I explained something about George and his ability. George, I realized, hired people who had just enough experience to do the job, but we weren't tired, or we weren't like most of the people I've worked with say, no, you can't do that. No, this is how we do it. It works. We never did that because George always wrote in every film, all 6 movies, he wrote what couldn't be done.
Mm-hmm.
And he put it into your hands and said, do it. He never came and told us this is what you do or what you have to do. He just had a very powerful instinct. So it's the same with the ILM boys. It's the same with everybody when you look at right the way through with Ben Burt. Ben Burt, who did this sound that, is iconic on Star Wars. He was a student. George hired him, and any other composer of sound design would have gone out and done spacey sounds. What did he do? He went to the zoo for a year with his tape recorder and recorded pigs and bears and walruses and played them backwards and made an organic soundtrack. And I likened that to what we did, and what I wanted to do was make something organic that the audience wouldn't question when they saw it. It felt familiar, and I think that was what broke the mold with Star Wars and continued then for every science fiction film. Even James Cameron does the same now.
Right. When you were decorating the sets, and like you say, you gave them an old look, to kind of match like old West stuff. How were you able to do that? I mean, to get to the props and everything that you needed to do, did you have to go search for everything, or how'd that work?
There was no props. There was no science fiction film, and there was none, and there were no higher places you could go and get stuff. So, and when I'd broken down the script and saw what I needed, first of all, John Barry saved the day by taking George to Tunisia and said, here's Tatooine. And it was. All I had to do was put bits of old junk and pieces of machinery into that old architecture. So I was kind of pondering, how on earth am I going to dress this? Because the other thing was, any sci-fi film has about 9 months to a year prep. Fox greenlit this movie. They actually gave us the money to move into the studios in Elstree. We moved in on January the 6th. We were shooting at the end of March in Tunisia with robots, with everything in place, the sandcrawler, everything. So A1, I saw there was no time. I couldn't go the usual way and design something, give it to the shops, and they would put it to plasterers and whatever. And I got this idea, why don't, and I was researching submarines and bombers and things, and I thought, well, why don't I just go and buy airplane junk? And because George had made THX, when I walked in and suggested the idea, I just go and buy a load of old airplane junk. Any other American director would have said, thank you very much. Here, well, goodbye. You go off and do whatever you want. They said, you know what, try it. So they flew me around aircraft junkyards in a little prop plane. And I found mountains of this stuff, mountains, literally. I could buy parts of airplanes. I was buying jet engines from Rolls-Royce. I was buying undercarriages, everything you could think of for hardly any money. And I think what sums it up, when I was we had a big property master, Frank Bruton, who was one of the very few people on that film who understood me and who supported me. So he said, what do we do with the prop room? I said, get rid of all this stuff, just empty it out. I'm bringing in all this junk, just get some metal shelving, and I'll teach the prop boys how to break it down, because it has to be correctly layered into the set. So you can't just randomly do it. This like 16-wheeler backs in, there were piled jet engines and roped on everything. I was so young, he called me boy, and I was standing next to him, this thing backed in, and I just heard this voice. I didn't look at him. He said, you know, you're mad, boy. And I said, well, probably, because I didn't know it would work. But,
Right.
but bless him, he said, all right, boy, tea's on in my office. You come there and tell me what you want. And I explained we needed tools, and we broke it down. That's how we did it. And we layered these amazing pieces of airplane junk into the Millennium Falcon sets. I was getting my buyers to buy me old junked camera parts, anything that was thrown out. I had skips being brought in, and I would go through it, and anything interesting I looked and saw, I would keep. And you know, the one of the things that I did was Luke's binder bins. So again, I couldn't make one, so I found an old camera part, a piece of one, and I thought, well, that looks like a good body. And I found another part that had a flip up top. I stuck that on with super glue. I found another piece, and then I thought, you know what, this could be the binder bins. And it was heavy. I needed 2 lenses, because I thought I'd better let the audience have a kind of inkling of what this is. So if I put 2 camera lenses on the front, it'll look like a viewing thing. I went to the camera hire store in London, where we hired everything, bought my 2 lenses, and then I said, David, do you have anything here? I've got to make a weapon for this Jedi. Do you have anything I could look at? I can't find anything suitable. And it was getting late now. They wanted Luke's lightsaber done. And he said, oh, go and look under that shelf. There's a load of boxes under there. I haven't looked at those for a long time, but have a look what's in. And the first one I pulled out, I opened it, and there, like, this was my second holy grail moment of, there were 3 Graflex handles that I just took one out and thought, oh, here it is. I could have used it just like that. It was beautiful. You know, when you have an object designed for something else, this was a tube that held the batteries that clipped onto a press camera from the 40s. And I raced back to EMI. I had a bit of the T-strip left over from my blaster, the Stormtroopers, stuck that round to make a handle. I'd that morning broken down, I got an old Texas Instrument calculator, and I unscrewed it, took it apart, found the bubble strip that magnified the numbers and enlarged them. And it fitted perfectly in the clip, and it made it into something else. And I just called George over and I said, I think I found the lightsaber. And he held it and just smiled. That's the approval from George.
Mm-hmm.
We added a D-ring on the end because it had to go onto Luke's belt in the desert. That was all I changed to it. And I made several of those that are the originals that were used by Luke. And what we had no time to meet the art department. My office was full of junk, but I had a because we spent, I mean, I didn't have a day off in almost a year, and I worked 7 days from 7 in the morning till mostly 10 at night to get this done. So in my office, I had a little fridge with some milk. I had tea bags, Tetley tea bags, which the entire British film industry ran on at that time. There was no coffee. And McVitie's chocolate biscuits. So we would all meet in my office at 7:30 sharp, and they'd all make tea. And we were discussing it, and I said, you know, I was doing art installations, and we were using front projection paint, and it was glowing in the art exhibits we were doing. And they said, oh, that's a good idea. Why don't you try it? So I made a second handle for the lightsaber, The special effects boys drilled the end out. They put a little motor in it with a long wooden dowel.
Mm-hmm.
They made the motor slightly off center so it vibrated instead of just turning, and we painted it, and blow me, it picked up light on the set. Not enough in the end. George had to rotoscope it, but it was there. You can see it in the behind the scenes. Luke's holding it when he fires it up when he first gets it with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then they were used extensively, the sticks, when the fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. And there was a decision made with George that the light blades should never pass through each other. It should behave like a samurai sword, which is what it was based on. So my sticks, Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse, could hit each other against the sticks. They broke so many in this fight. It was a fairly simple fight, but this is how we did things. Everything was done like this, you know. Something that also, I mean, there's many stories in the Galaxy Built on Hope, because what George was so frantically busy trying to get this movie made, rewriting the script, trying to do it, there was no inkling of what went on behind the scenes. John Barry died sadly on Empire Strikes Back very young. David West Reynolds, who was the head of literature at Lucasfilm, just hounded me and said, you've got to write this down. This is a legacy. No one knows this stuff except for you. So I wrote Cinema Alchemist. Then they bugged me and said, there's not one making of that handles this, even the official ones. So you've got to make it. So with the same spirit that we made the first Star Wars movie, a company here in Canada, JC Ideal Entertainment, and a Los Angeles studio called Wardour Studios, they between them gave me just enough money to do this and get it made.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then COVID struck. We were landlocked in Canada. You couldn't get in or out. And so I had to rethink the entire meal, the entire way I was doing it, to try to do something interesting. Again, I just put my same kind of thinking cap on, and I found a virtual studio in Toronto that were making children's films. And I had Paul Bateman he became a huge ally of Ralph McQuarrie, who painted the original 6 paintings that Star Wars was based on. And I really wanted to give Ralph McQuarrie his place in my documentary, because, you know, the Guillermo del Toro and Gareth Edwards, who are both interviewed in it, both are saying this man's a genius. He's, you know, he's never got the full acclaim, I think. So Paul painted me sets as if Ralph McQuarrie had painted them using game technology, using about 37 layers. They were all pieced together. So instead of sitting in a studio just talking, I'm underneath the Millennium Falcon in the desert. I'm in complete deserts. I'm inside the Millennium Falcon. We're in libraries. I was in all sorts of places. So again, you know, you just have to. And the last line in my book is, don't let anyone tell you can't, you can. And I think that philosophy has kind of been part of my entire career. Not easy sometimes, but far more rewarding.
Here's a question about CGI and all this stuff, like you were just talking about. You know, with you being coming up from that other part of it where it was all hands-on, do you think, and I know for these young guys, it's exciting for them because that's what they've done. They've done their video games, you know, all their lives, and it's great to create this. It's a totally different generation. But do you think, like, you know, as far as the satisfaction of building something like that and actually seeing it in use, it kind of takes away from it?
I think, you know, I call it now the toy box is open. We can do anything. Since now they had young Luke in Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Since that, you realize it's now open. Sesame, it's done. We now have the alchemy is there. We can do whatever we like. But ILM still use models. James Cameron uses models. People still stick to that because there is something organic in that does bleed into the screen. You look at DC and Marvel movies, and no one does them better than Hollywood. They're amazing. And you go and you get your fix, but you know that a man can't fly like that.
Right.
All of those things, so you accept it, and it's a huge vision. But with a film like Star Wars and even like Avatar, I think he broke the mold with that when the first one came out.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly Rogue One, when I look at it, and JJ was extensively using models in both of his Star Wars movies. There is something that bleeds through onto the screen, and the satisfaction for us is incredible. And I met Christopher Nolan at a screening of Dunkirk. He said, "I've got to talk to you because in your days, the set decorator did everything. You had to handle a robot, everything." And I said, "Yeah, everything." He said, "Now it's all broken up into compartments."
Mm-hmm.
But the satisfaction of being part of a movie that you are such a crucial kind of part of in creating the whole vision for the movie. When you're doing it, you're on the set, the actors, we built the Millennium Falcon, half of it, but the actors are running, jumping in it, they're playing around in it. I know they're used to it, doing it with green screen, but things happen, accidents happen, dust piece of light happens on a model shoot and it becomes magic. I guess eventually they'll build all these accidents into a computer, so you get the same thing probably. Right. But I think, and it's George, and here's the thing: George only ever did his special effects to tell the story. It was never done for any other reason than he needed a way to tell how to, the Death Star run at the end, the bombing run. It's all done with miniatures. And I think, obviously now with The Mandalorian and the volume and the new stages, now the actors are actually experiencing it all. And this is, in truth, that's where George wanted to go. On Skywalker, he wanted to build a digital studio like that, and he was too far ahead of his time again. And I think if that had been available, I think he would have probably directed the last three himself, but it wasn't there yet. It's there now. Mm-hmm. But even then, they are creating stuff on sets. And I think I lecture and I do stuff with young students, and I say, get a story. Tell the story first. How can I tell this story? If you can do it with your iPhone, do it. But don't say, "Oh, I'll get in post and I'll do all this stuff afterwards." Mm-hmm. That's not the way to tell a story. You need the heart of it. And that is the difference, to me, with Star Wars. Right. George created a myth for the entire world to believe in, and it's real. Everybody believes it. There's been no saga of films like this ever that's connected to a globe, and I don't think there ever will be again. The circumstances at that time in the 70s and was ripe for this to happen, and George plugged into that universal kind of subconscious.
Absolutely. I was just thinking while you were saying that was like you say, some things change, some things don't. When you look at the Grogu puppet and you look at the way they did with what they did with Yoda,
yes,
even though there's parts of Grogu that are electronic, they still have to puppeteer him to move his arms. They have to puppeteer him to flip, like if he doesn't flip, it's still done by hand, just like it was with Yoda. So it's interesting how they're incorporating the old ways in with the new ways.
Yeah, and I directed. George had me direct second unit for him on Return of the Jedi and on the Phantom Menace. And on Return of the Jedi, we had Frank Oz on set puppeteering Yoda, just to see the actors like Samuel Jackson. They're talking to Yoda and he's talking back. There was an interaction. There wasn't a blue ball on a stick.
Right.
And it's magic. this stuff. And when you get somebody, a master like Frank Oz, they come alive, and they still do. And I still think now I can tell the difference between the puppet ones and the CGI ones. And there's something about the puppet ones, and I don't look back. You can tell from my whole career and what I've said now. I'm the one looking forwards. I was pushing with George to go digital when Phantom Menace, we were trying out the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not somebody who looks back. I try to advance, but not for the sake of storytelling or for an audience, or to kind of be authentic, really.
I think, like, even when I was building sets, what I always thought was breathtaking was once you get the idea and you actually put it together and build it, and the first time you walk out on the set and you actually see the fruits of your labor and you see what it looks like.
Yes.
Because it takes your breath away, because you realize, oh my God, I did this. I put this together.
And it's something else that I kind of talked about as well in the documentary, that it got to a crisis. Star Wars, it's no secret, the crew thought this was a pile of rubbish. They thought it was a children's fairy story, would never see the light of day. George was a very quiet young American director. He didn't have that shouting American presence, I'm in charge. He didn't do that. He got on with his job. So the DP was awful to him through the whole way through the shoot, and everybody. And it got to a crisis point when they called Alan Ladd over, and there was a very serious meeting went on without George, and you can imagine what the tone of that meeting was. But when I think Alan Ladd walked around the studios with George, and George was telling him what he was going to do. He hadn't edited one frame. The English editor was doing a conventional way of wide shot, mid shot. George said, I don't shoot it like that. I'm not going to do it like that. And it looked terrible. But you know what? When Alan Ladd walked into that stage and there was full scale, half of the Millennium Falcon, I watched people come in and their breath stopped. And when you walked inside that hold area for the ship,
Mm-hmm.
I think when he looked at all of this and looked at the sets that we were doing, the Death Star interiors, I think he thought, this kid is doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helped the sets that were built then. However, we struggled to make them with plastic stuff. With the Death Star was sheets. We found a vac former that was a primitive early version of it, and we could print out sheets, and they were stapled on the wood. But it created the scale, And I think all of that kind of helped to convince Alan Ladd to continue with George and to finish the movie, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, when you built this stuff, now here's my other question too, because I know stuff tends to be flimsy, because it's not, it's not like permanent wood stuff. How flimsy was the stuff? I mean, if they bumped into into a wall or something, was it going to vibrate, or was it put together better than that?
Well, it had the conventional wooden frames, which were pretty strong. And then, if you banged into the Death Star panels that we'd put on it, then they would shake a bit. But there wasn't much of that in the film, so it was all right. There was one instance whereby the special effects boys who were supposed to be doing the radio control and R2D2, they hardly worked. And in fact, before we went to Tunisia, John Barry called Les Dealey, the art director, and I into his office and said, listen, this radio control is not going to work. John's promising George everything's great and it's wonderful. It's not going to work. Build a little tiny, build a fiberglass lightweight version of it, exactly duplicated, that we could pull on fishing wire. And the first morning on set, the R2D2 was the first thing that was shot. We did the lineup of Uncle Owen buying the robots. R2D2 went crashing into another one. It was mayhem. And Gary Kurtz said, can you get yours out? He was the only person who knew. And from then on, most of the running on three legs, we did pulling it on a fishing wire. George just cut enough to put it together. But I think that the Death Star was really those interiors. It was pretty strong because the garbage incinerator I had to do filled with junk. They were walls that had to compress, and we had actors in there in the water.
Right.
They were built pretty solidly. The the sand crawler, I'm trying to think which. Otherwise, they were kind of built out of plaster to mimic the Tunisian architecture, so they were pretty strong actually.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't change much in Tunisia. We put some more domes on because they were existing and they looked sci-fi. They were wonderful. I show in the documentary how we go back, and David West Reynolds found that. He went back in '95 and found where we shot, and he found the dome was upside down with goats to drink out of it and have water in it. And he found the door to the cantina we built, which was solid. It was a wooden door.
Mm-hmm.
It was holding the chickens in. It was a door for the local guys' chickens. So they stood the test of time. They're now in the Ranchi Oberwan Museum. Steve
Yeah.
Sandquist has them all. So, my airplane junk was all solid. It was real. So
Right.
what I'd encrusted the Millennium Falcon with, that was pretty solid, actually. It was quite weighty. And the cockpit itself.
It's incredible to me. I mean, when people don't realize, who aren't in the industry, what a set really is.
No.
Or how they're built, because everything on TV and movies look so different. They don't realize that that some of these walls are made out of I'm not going to say canvas. I forget my mind. I got a brain fart, but the materials they're made out of. And how just by shutting the door when like if they have to walk.
They will wobble.
Yeah, it shuts the door.
I know. It's true. Well, ours were pretty strong because they had to be to support everything, and really, George, because of the budget, there were only really sets in EMI and Tunisia locations. So that's really all we had to deal with. We weren't stretched going all over the place to different places. Yes, Tunisia, we went from one end of the country to the other, but I think once I dressed all the junk in, when they walk into the cantina, there's a crashed spaceship. It's the size of a Boeing 747. Now, with very little money, always the question is, what on earth was that doing there? Well, when John found the location, which was perfect, there was one huge olive tree, and it completely spoiled this dusty spaghetti Western look. So John sketched this huge spaceship. They built a wooden former to put it on, and I took my Death Star panels because they were cheap and light, and I packed a load of them onto the truck to Tunisia, and I got up on ladders and I stapled them on and got a blowtorch and I burnt them down and made them look like distressed metal. And then once I'd sprayed it with the sand mixed into some paint, it became a crashed spaceship. So this thing, no one's really pointed it out, except now I talk about it in the documentary. But there it was, this size of a Boeing, that actually set a precedent for every Star Wars movie. If you look, there is always crashed spaceships now, right up to The Last Skywalker. There's always, Rey is living in one. That's kind of set an interesting way to show these planets have a history. Things have gone on here, and it's like, oh, there were wars here, things happened, all those things I think help to give you that overall impression of a real place rather than somewhere that's just a built sci-fi set. I think that's the secret, that's what I did. And I'd always cover stuff in oil and beat it and dent it. Look at C-3PO. Maria was a beautiful gold robot. We banged a hole in his head, so he had a dent in the head. And R2-D2 is well beaten up. Luke's land speeder is really dented. He's, like a little sports car he had that he's crashed quite a few times. I think.
One question I have really quick for you is, you guys originated these sets. You originated the Millennium Falcon. The X-wing fighters and all that stuff. Do you think when they went to create the sequel trilogy, was it difficult for them to do it? I mean, yeah, of course they have CGI to do it, but you've got the new set decorators that are looking at your designs and looking at what you did. Do you think it was difficult for them to do that, or was it easier for them because you had already done it?
I think because we'd already done it. I mean, when I first joined the crew on Phantom Menace to be the second unit director, the first thing they did, they said, the designer wants to talk to you. And I went down and talked to him. He said, what do I do? I don't understand. George doesn't talk. He doesn't say anything. What? He was panicking. And I said, listen, you design whatever you think and you show George. He'll say yes or no. And he'll suggest an alternative. That's all you've got to do. You just keep throwing it in there. Same with the set decorator. He said, I don't know how to deal with this. And he said, because you've already done it all. And I said, well, we did it and George approved it and it created Star Wars. So that's what you follow. And certainly for ILM, I mean, they were in the same boat as us, and you can see it on these documentaries. I mean, there were no computers. There was no way to do repeat passes. There was no way to do anything. And all of their first budget to do the shots was on building machinery to actually be able to do what George had written, and which they did successfully. So once they'd done that, for sure, it got much easier for them. Rick McCullum told me on Phantom Menace, they needed tons of airplane scrap to duplicate what I did. Because of that and art directing Alien, I'd set up a whole industry of scrap in Britain. I didn't know this. It was so expensive. It was cheaper for Rick to go and get it chosen in the graveyards in Texas and fly it in a plane to Tunisia. That was cheaper than going to rent it in the UK at the time.
That's funny. Yeah. That's funny. Now you brought up a good point. You were involved in another film that I didn't watch for years. I can tell you that right now. That scared the hell out of me. And with Alien, how did they come to you and ask you about that, to do set work or whatever you were doing, that from concept to film?
I was actually on Life of Brian, the Monty Python film. We were, and I knew Ridley and Tony because I used to do commercials with them, and I knew them very well. And so I wasn't free. So he got Michael Seymour designing it. Michael was much more of a commercials designer, and the set decorator was a dear friend of mine, but he did films like period films only, big ones that he did, Howard's End, things like that. They had no idea about buying scrap or anything. I was on Life of Brian. The financier read the script 2 weeks before I was flying out to design it with Terry Gilliam, and he cancelled the film. I was called to London and they said, look, we are going to get the money. We want you to do it, but we're gone down for a bit. Ridley phoned the office that day and said, Roger, get your backside down to Shepperton. I need you down here now. I drove down to Shepperton, read the script in 90 minutes because the script is incredible. I was in a room where there were the original Giger paintings around the wall. You can imagine, for me, this was like, whoa. And Ridley was doing his storyboards, which he's one of the top storyboard artists in the world. He's unbelievable. He can draw a unicorn upside down for your perspective. I mean, he's amazing. He said, can you just take over? And I did. I went down. The set decorator, Ian, who did Howard's End, grabbed me on the stage, hugged me and said, thank God you're here. I dipped curtains in tea to make them look old. I can't do this stuff. So I went and what Ridley basically said to me was, I want a space truck, used truck that would be going backwards and forwards with mining stuff. What really I'd set the precedent in the Millennium Falcon in the hold. That's what he wanted, but a more army kind of military version of it. So I just did the same thing. I was art directing it, and I was put in charge of creating the interior look of the whole Nostromo.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and bought a ton of scrap, and I set to work. And again, this was the first R-rated sci-fi movie, so there was very little faith that it would work.
Mm-hmm.
Ridley was a new director. He'd only done The Duelist. So the budget was slashed. It was way under what it should have been, but using the same techniques and everything, we kind of made it work, you know. And what I did, Ridley wanted to screen test Sigourney Weaver, and most screen tests are with a white wall and a plant.
Mm-hmm.
Ridley wanted to show Fox because he had to convince them she was the right person for the role, not the star they were wanting. So I built a piece of the corridor for him using drain pipes and scrap and everything. And we built that section and had her in there. And I made a weapon with the special effects boys for her to carry. I think that he was right. That whole kind of look of her in that ship and everything convinced Fox to go with Sigourney Weaver. And from then on in, I brought the team over I trained on Star Wars, 3 of them, and they came and they did all the interiors with me to get the whole thing to look like Ridley wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was incredible because they built it on 2 stages joined together in Shepperton, so that Ridley wanted those shots at the beginning where you're like the Mary Celeste, the ship is empty of people, but it's alive. And you walked in a little gap in the set and you were in, you couldn't get out. You had to walk in through the bridge, everywhere, right the way through the hold areas until you had to come back and come out of the hole again. It was an extraordinary experience. And again, I just saw people coming to visit who just thought, wow, you've got a ship somehow. Where did you get this from? It's all so real, you know. That's always been my mantra. Nothing can look out of place. Nothing can spoil the overall reality of an audience is looking at, and they can believe it, they accept it, then they're not questioning it. So you're not losing your audience.
Is it hard? I mean, like you went from Star Wars to, working on the ships with that. Is it hard to, or do you have a lot of aid from the director about what their vision is for these ships? Because, I mean, like you say, you would be borrowing ideas from the Millennium Falcon too, and you don't want people to see that on screen. So is it hard to go in and rethink everything like that?
In truth, it was very easy because we had Ralph McQuarrie, and Ralph is a genius. They're still using, by the way, this. Ralph spent his entire life painting things, illustrations. They're still using them now on the Mandalorian, on Boba Fett. There's still his designs. Doug Chang is pulling them out. Oh, there, we've got it already designed. On Alien, we had Ron Cobb, who's absolute brilliant. And I mean, I would go to Ron and say, Ron, we've got to put in the hold something that would be able to power around the planet and do this and do that. He would draw it, not only draw and illustrated it, but he'd tell you which engines they were and what type of Rolls Royce, this and that, everything detailed. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I was always in his office just saying, what about this? What about that? And the entire film comes down to Ridley because he has that vision and he knew what he wanted. The first bridge designs, they were done by various different artists. They looked a bit like Star Trek bridge, some of them. Ridley wanted it like an old bomber that was crusted. He took the ceiling that Michael Seymour had designed and done. He took it down 3 times, pulled it down, much to the chagrin of Michael Seymour, but he wanted that claustrophobia of the ceiling, like you are in a chopper or a bomber. It's all around you. He wanted that feeling when he was shooting. So, it really comes down to Ridley and his vision.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just find, and after, like I said, my experience wasn't as extensive as yours, not even close. But I always admire people like, folks like you, who can go in and do that stuff. And you've been rewarded for your task, Star Wars and Aliens, and you deserve it. You deserve all the work you put in.
It's funny, isn't it? Because again, writing the book, and I had to analyze, where does all this come from? And I did then flash back to my youth when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I took my dinky toys. I was always painting them and making them look more real. I had a little camera, and I'd go in the garden and make tracks, and I'd put them into landscapes. And I realized I was even doing it then as a young child. So, I do, again, on the documentary, I go through. I was born 2 years before the war ended.
Mm-hmm.
And where I was born, Croydon, the geniuses in the British government Secret Service, they had got the Germans to believe that the distance the flying bombs needed to fly to hit central London actually was Croydon. It wasn't central London. So as a little community outside, it's London, it's part of it.
Right.
We had like 190 or something flying bombs dropped on us. So the only story I ever heard, no one would talk about the war. My parents, nobody, no relations, nothing. But the only story an aunt told me was that when I was 6 months old, my father was fighting in the war in Java, so he didn't see me till I was 2 years old. A flying bomb blew the front of the house. The windows all blew in. I was covered in red, and they thought I'd bought it. And my mother had a sacred bottle of ketchup, which, we would get 1 egg a week. You had these rations. There was one bottle of ketchup. It had exploded and covered me in ketchup. But what I observed at a time, and I wouldn't remember it as a conscious memory, but I was in streets that were bombed out, ruined everywhere, and I think somehow in the subconscious that probably affected how I see things in life.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows, where it all comes from. And I was born with this kind of stubborn ingenuity that I wanted to do things differently. And I was, that my path through making movies led that way. And I was destiny kind of put John Barry and myself and George together,
Mm-hmm.
and Ridley together you something that really did change cinema.
Absolutely. You guys changed sci-fi to what it is now. I mean, if it hadn't been for you, we'd still be at plastic sets.
Yeah. So then I had to take 2 years. So thanks to David West Reynolds, I had to take 2 years off and write this book. And I wrote 630 pages for Cinema Alchemist. And then John Rinsler, who was the head of literature and a brilliant writer, he edited for me down to the 300 pages we published. And the same really with this documentary, because, everyone said nowadays people want to watch this on phones. They need to see what you did. This is a legacy. So, and we decided first up that all the fans in the world, they buck the trend, Star Wars fans. They want Blu-rays. They want them at home on the shelf, everything like that. So we decided only to release it through the website on Blu-ray and DVD, so people could get it. And then eventually it'll go to a streamer. And it's got everything in it, 2.5 hours of, it's got the making of, it's all combined as a fan special. When it goes to streamer, it'll obviously be cut down. That's fine, but we wanted to kind of start with a fan special.
Fantastic.
But, yeah.
This hour has gone by.
Oh, already? There
oh my
you go.
gosh, yeah. Oh my gosh. It's been wonderful talking to you. It's been a blast, and it's just so fascinating to talk to you. Like I said, I've been into stuff, doing stuff hands-on for years and years and years, and to hear it from someone as professional as you, who's won Academy Awards, and this, it's just fantastic to talk to somebody and pick your brain a little bit.
Well, it's something. See, we all get subject. You hear it. You hear these big stars. You hear Justin Bieber. Just follow your dreams. You'll get there. And all the big actors, everybody. That's wrong information. Because not everybody is a Justin Bieber. What the information that I spread is that the hero's journey is your own journey. You do whatever you do to the best of your ability, and that's success. That's all you need to do. If you find that and you enjoy it like you do, that's a huge success to me. And I applaud you for doing that. I happen to do it on a, we sort of got paid to do it for both films, but we kind of did it on a bigger scale. But it doesn't matter, It's like, if you're at home, you're building Lego models. You're then creating your own Lego. I've got an 8-year-old son. He's now creating. He's bringing into me amazing robots and stuff. He's putting it together himself. That's what I would like to attribute as a mentor to the world. That's what everyone should find their way to do.
Absolutely. How can people find you?
Well, galaxybuiltonhope.com is the website. That's where the Blu-rays are. You can go through there. I think there's a Instagram page with my name on it, and there's a Galaxy page, Galaxy Built on Hope Instagram page. And I'm sort of on Facebook or Twitter, sort of, but I think probably Instagram does it, but the website will do it. There is contact in there, and you can go through to the PR and social media people, and they obviously connect in because, I'm working and doing a lot of stuff. So that's the way to do it. And I'm hoping we'll do some lectures later on, David West Reynolds and I'm hoping we can talk to people about how we did all of this.
Absolutely. Roger, thank you so much. I would love to have you on later on to talk more, to pick your brain. I think it's great because we only touched on a couple things, in your career. So if you're willing to come on, I'll get a hold of your PR people later on, and we'll get you back on, sir. Anytime.
I enjoy these, and I want to give back. It's like, to me, it's a given process. So, and I thank the two financiers again. That's, Rita Sharda and Stephen Neer. They put faith in me that I could make this with a very limited budget. So I got it done, and we've got it made, and it's out there now. And there's proof. There it is in a box, and that's a legacy for Star Wars because it's growing. This is not getting smaller. I mean, just the younger generations. So they all look and see these giant Hollywood movies. Well, when you go back to the beginning, it was a humble group of a few kind of cinema revolutionaries, and that's what's important, I think, for people to understand. I agree. All right, Roger. Well, thank you so much. Not at all. Thank you. Nice to meet you. And you. I want to see one of your models now. Oh, I'll do that. I'll be in touch and show you. I will. Okay. I'm going to be dragging stuff out, so Okay. No bodies. No bodies. Right. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Well, that was a wow factor, I'll tell you, and I enjoyed that thoroughly, and I hope he did too. Like I said in the beginning, I was not a Star Wars fan. I was a Star Trek fan. I thought, and like he made a good point about the studio thinking it was a children's story, because that's what I thought. Honestly, I thought the whole thing was for kids, and so I was like, no, I don't want to watch it. But like I said, later on, I got into it, so it was great. Tomorrow we'll be back on at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Mark Muncy is going to be with us. Mark Muncy has written a series of books about the state of Florida and the weird things that go on in Florida. The main book is called Eerie, Florida. So he has written these books, and so we're going to be talking to him at 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. I want to thank everybody for coming this morning. I really appreciate it. This is going to re-air later on this evening, for everybody that's at work right now. But I want to thank everybody. If you're watching from Facebook, please hit that follow button. If you're watching from Twitter, same thing. If you're watching from Twitch, hit that follow button. If you're watching from TikTok, hit that follow button. And especially if you're watching from YouTube, or you're going to be watching from YouTube, there's a little ghost down in the bottom right-hand corner with a magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat on. That is our mascot. We have more than 350 videos over there, and that will take you, that will give you access to what's coming up, what we have, and all that good stuff. And there's varying topics, like this topic today. I don't stick to ghost topics and stuff. I'm a journalist. I'm a photojournalist. I like mixing it up. So you're going to see all kinds of topics. I think
I think there's something over there for everybody. So if you check it out. You can also find us at CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com, the paranormal group at CaliforniaHaunts.org. Again, I want to thank you guys for coming this morning. It's early. We're usually not on this early, but it's early. This is what, even for me, I'm a night owl. So it was like when I woke up, I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. But here I am. But anyway, again, I want to thank you all for coming. All right. Now, something if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. I am equal opportunity here at California House Radio. Actually, we are. Sorry. And we want to get the word out about this show. We think it's, we think it's a good product. And YouTube doesn't give us any love, really, But it's getting better. And again, last night I thanked everybody, and I want to thank everybody again. Our numbers are starting to really rise as far as our downloads on our podcast version. And I just thank everybody out there all over the world who listen to us. I just thank you, because you're helping me raise the numbers, and that's by hearing the show and sharing it and saying, hey, this little show here is pretty good, why don't you listen to it? Or you might say, this little show's really crappy, why don't you listen to it and laugh, right? Whatever strikes you. But I want to thank everybody, and I hope you keep that effort up. I mean, if one person shares with 5 people that they know, okay, and those 5 people share with 5 people that they know, it creates a snowball effect. And I think that's what's happening now. That snowball effect is coming into play. So I really appreciate each and every one of you. We got our first donation from France last week. That was really stoking, exciting. I mean, that was awesome. Thank you very much to the fan in France. And I've had people help support us throughout the year. So here comes my plea. This is the KVIE thing that I do every day. This show is funded out of my own pocket, just like the paranormal group is funded out of my own pocket. We don't get paid to investigate. We don't do that stuff, okay? I mean, if people want to donate after we're done and we do a good job, they think, then it's cool. But I mean, we don't go out there and demand money to investigate or anything like that. So all this and all the paranormal group stuff is funded out of my pocket. So if the computer breaks, I have to pay to replace it. Headphones we just replaced this year, things like that go wrong that have to be replaced, just like travel for the paranormal team, equipment for the paranormal team, stuff like that. So if you could help me out a little bit, because I love doing the show, I want to keep it on the air. We're heading into our 3rd year starting in September, and I'm surprised we made it this long. Talk about, like he was talking about, doing those movies on a shoestring budget. We do the show on a shoestring budget, okay? And so I'd appreciate some help if you could do it, because I know money's tight for people, but I mean, it would be great if you could. You can do that at paypal.me at California Haunts, or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, there's Venmo, okay? Just go to Venmo, type in California Haunts, and you're there. And it's just, it all goes into operating expenses for the show. It goes into operating expenses for the paranormal group, so we can go out and help people. We're not one of these groups that goes out and says, oh, you have a ghost. No, we go out to educate. That's what we do. So we're not looking for just ghosts. We're looking for normal things that could be causing the issues. And that includes health issues. You might be on some kind of medications that might be having you hallucinate, things like that. You know what I mean? We're looking for all that stuff. Because if you don't, it's a disservice when you go out to see a client. All right, that being said, I'm going to shut up now because I have a couple more interviews that I'm taping today. And let me figure out what page I'm on here. And I do have his contact information for the website and for his documentary that's on that site. So I'll give you all that information and how to do this, because I think it's going to be fascinating. And if you haven't seen it yet on Disney Plus, do watch the TV series on ILM, because that gives you a lot of insight, like he was talking about, as to how things were when George Lucas did Star Wars. But it also, and not only that, it talks about aliens. It talks about all those other movies too that ILM has done work, has been called on to do work on. So I mean, it all lumps in together, right? It all lumps in together. So anyway, here's his information. So you got a website of galaxybuiltonhope.com. And the video is Galaxy Built on Hope. And that was with Roger Christensen. Anyway, thank you guys. I will see you tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a good evening and a day. Sorry, it's early. Have a good day and evening. Bye.